Mom's sick, so I came instead. A little girl walked into the Vampire King's fortress. What the immortal did next shattered a century of silence. Excuse me, Your Majesty. I came to work for my mommy today. She couldn't get out of bed. Lord Kale Ravensong looked up from his reports, motionless. Twilight hours usually meant decrees, executions, and the cold machinery of immortal rule, not 6-year-olds in oversized aprons standing in his obsidian office. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. She stood there in the doorway, small and solemn, her golden curls catching the violet glow of enchanted sconces. The apron she wore hung off her tiny frame like a borrowed cloak, the hem dragging against the polished floor. In one hand, she clutched a folded linen cloth. In the other, a bundle of fresh lavender. My name is Arya, she added, voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. My mommy's name is Vivian. She works here, but she's really sick today, so I came instead. I know what she does. She showed me. Kale stared. Was this some kind of test? An illusion? But the look in her eyes, earnest, unwavering, said otherwise. She believed this mission was hers to carry out. He rose slowly from his throne-like chair, careful not to startle her. Arya, he said, his voice low, measured. How did you get here? She looked down at her scuffed boots. I walked. Mommy showed me the path through the lower city. I remembered which streets had the least monsters. You walked through Nightriven. Alone. She nodded. I remembered the castle. It's the one with the tall black towers and the violet lights. One time Mommy brought me close, and I told her I thought it looked like a palace from a storybook. She said it was, but the kind where you have to be very, very careful. Kale's crimson eyes narrowed, but not with anger. Something else stirred beneath his ancient calm. She continued, her voice soft but earnest. This morning, Mommy couldn't stand up. She was shaking and coughing dark stuff. I gave her water and covered her with blankets. Then I remembered. Mommy said if she misses work again, we'll lose our home. So I came. I didn't want her to get in trouble. Kale descended the steps from his desk, hands folded behind his back. He'd negotiated treaties with werewolf clans and silenced rebellions without hesitation. But now a 6-year-old girl was unraveling him with every word. You came here to save your mother's position. Arya nodded. She works really hard. She's the best mommy. He exhaled slowly. Unnecessary for one who no longer breathed out of need, yet the habit persisted. This child had made it all the way to his private office. Somehow, she had slipped past enchanted wards, climbed endless obsidian stairs, and walked straight into the heart of his fortress. Not for mischief, not for curiosity, but out of love. Fierce, innocent, unshakable love. A servant's bell chimed softly in the corner. Lord Ravensong, the council convenes in 10 minutes. He pressed a sigil on his desk. Cancel it. A pause. My lord. All of it. This evening's agenda. Postpone. Yes, my lord. He turned back to Arya. Are you hungry? She gave a little shrug. Do you have bread? Or maybe honey tea? I believe I do. He moved to a cabinet carved from black wood and retrieved a silver tray with warm bread, butter, and a small cup of honeyed chamomile. She took the cup with both hands and whispered, "Thank you," before sitting on the velvet bench near the arched window, her legs swinging. Kale watched her quietly as she sipped her tea and stared out over the city. She looked so small against the vast skyline of Nightriven, and yet she had walked into his world with more purpose and heart than most immortals ever showed in a lifetime. He didn't know everything about her. Not yet. But something deep in his chest, something he thought had died long ago, stirred with recognition. This moment wasn't random. It wasn't just surprising. It was the beginning of something. And he needed to understand why. On the other side of the city, a mother lay on a thin cot, fighting for breath. Vivian Solon was only 28, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had survived far more than her years suggested. She moved through life with quiet grace, accustomed to making herself invisible in crowded halls and noble corridors. Her once lustrous blonde hair was now tied in a hurried braid, and her soft smile, often masked the exhaustion she carried like a second heartbeat. Not long ago, she had been something more. A healer's apprentice. A woman trusted with secrets. A girl who had once helped someone escape certain death. Someone whose name she vowed never to speak aloud again. But all of that vanished the moment she made her choice. By the time she realized the cost, she was holding a newborn daughter in her trembling arms, alone in a cold room with no one to help her. When the nobles came asking questions, she disappeared. Her family, loyal to the old vampire laws, responded with cold silence. "You chose a dangerous path," her mother had said. Her father refused to speak her name. They cast her out within the week. She left with nothing but 2 bags and the child she swore to protect. The world outside the castle walls was colder than she expected. She cleaned floors, mended uniforms, scrubbed blood from marble, anything to survive. Her body ached through every shift, but each night she whispered to her daughter, "I'll never leave you, no matter what." Arya was born on a stormy winter night in a crowded healer's ward, with no one there but a midwife who gently placed the baby in her arms. That moment was the beginning of everything. That moment was the beginning of everything. But for Cale, standing in his office as twilight deepened into true night, the beginning felt more like an ending unraveling in reverse. He had sent Arya down to the laundry chambers with strict instructions. She was to be supervised, fed, and under no circumstances was she to be sent home alone. The head steward, a sharp-eyed woman named Celeste, had looked at him with barely concealed shock when he'd issued the orders. "My lord," Celeste had ventured carefully, "the child's mother is gravely ill. Perhaps we should summon a healer to their residence, and—" "Do as I command," Cale interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "And send word to the lower city. I want Vivian Solon's condition monitored closely." Celeste bowed and retreated, but not before Cale caught the flicker of curiosity in her expression. He couldn't blame her. In over a century of rule, he had never shown interest in the personal affairs of castle staff. They worked, they served, they remained invisible. Until now. The laundry chambers were vast and steam-filled, lined with copper basins and enchanted ringers that moved with mechanical precision. Arya stood on a wooden stool before one of the basins, sleeves rolled to her elbows, carefully dunking a linen sheet into soapy water. She was terrible at it. The sheet slipped from her small hands twice. Soap suds splashed across her apron. She bit her lip in concentration, determined not to cry, and tried again. Around her, the other laundresses whispered, "That's the child who walked into his office? Alone. No escort. Just walked right in. They say he didn't punish her. Didn't even raise his voice. Impossible. Lord Ravensong doesn't spare anyone." Well, he spared her. Arya heard the whispers, but didn't look up. She focused on the task, scrubbing the fabric the way her mother had shown her, even though her arms ached and her fingers were turning pink from the hot water. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. Mommy would be proud. High above, in his private study, Cale stood before an ornate mirror framed in black and silver. He passed his hand over the glass, and the reflection shifted, no longer showing his own face, but the laundry chamber below. He watched Arya struggle with the linens, watched her persist even as exhaustion crept into her small frame, watched her wipe her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of soap across her cheek. Something tightened in his chest. It had been so long since he'd felt anything close to concern. The enchanted quills on his desk began to move, scratching across parchment faster than usual, as though responding to some unseen energy. Cale glanced at them, frowning. The quills had been idle moments ago. Then he noticed the candles. The sconces lining the walls flared brighter, their flames dancing with unusual vigor. The violet glow intensified, casting sharper shadows across the room. Cale's gaze returned to the mirror. Arya had moved closer to one of the enchanted braziers. The moment she passed it, the flames leapt higher, illuminating her golden curls like a halo. The castle was reacting to her. Cale's jaw tightened. He'd felt the ward shift when she'd entered earlier, softening, bending, as though they recognized her, as though they welcomed her. But that was impossible. The wards of Castle Ravensong had been woven with ancient magic, designed to repel mortals and alert him to any intrusion. They should have resisted her, or, at the very least, sounded an alarm. Instead, they had parted like a curtain. He pressed the sigil on his desk. "Celeste, come to my study, now." The head steward arrived within minutes, her expression carefully neutral. "Tell me about Vivian Solon," Cale said without preamble. Celeste blinked. "The laundress, my lord?" "Yes. Her work history, her character, everything." Celeste folded her hands. "Vivian has served the castle for nearly 7 years, I believe. She's one of our most reliable workers. Quiet, humble, never requests time off, never complains. And before that, I don't know, my lord. She arrived with little more than the clothes on her back and a newborn child. We hired her out of necessity. She was skilled and willing. She's kept to herself ever since." Cale's eyes narrowed. "Discreet." "Extremely so, my lord. She avoids gossip, avoids attention. If anything, she's almost invisible." "Invisible," Cale repeated softly. "Or hiding." Celeste shifted uncomfortably. "My lord, has she ever mentioned her past? Her family? Where did she come from?" "Not that I'm aware of, my lord. And I've never pressed it. Many who come to work in the castle do so, because they have nowhere else to go." Cale dismissed her with a wave, his mind churning. Vivian Solon, a woman who appeared 7 years ago with a child and no history. A woman who was fiercely private. A woman whose daughter carried a face that haunted him across a century. And now, gravely ill with an affliction that reeked of dark magic. This was no coincidence. Later that evening, Cale found himself walking the shadowed corridors toward the laundry chambers. He told himself it was to inspect the work, to ensure the child wasn't being mistreated. But when he reached the doorway and saw Arya sitting on the stone floor, carefully folding a stack of linens with her small, clumsy hands, he stopped. She looked up, startled, and quickly stood. "Your Majesty, I'm almost done, I promise." "Sit," Cale said quietly. She obeyed, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. He approached slowly, lowering himself to one knee so they were eye level. "Why are you doing this, Arya?" She blinked. "Because Mommy can't, and we need the job. You're 6 years old. This is not your burden to carry." Her chin lifted, just slightly. "But I can help. I want to help. I want to make Mommy proud." Cale studied her face, the determination, the innocence, the unshakable love. And for the first time in 100 years, he felt the ice around his heart fracture. "You already have," he said softly. Arya smiled, small and tentative. "Really? Really?" That night, Cale stood on the balcony of his chamber, staring out over Night Riven. The city sprawled below, a labyrinth of cobblestone and shadow, lit by scattered lanterns and the glow of enchanted street lamps. But he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing golden curls, blue eyes, a face he thought he'd lost forever. The candles in his chamber flared suddenly, flames bending toward the open window as though drawn by something beyond the glass. Cale's hands gripped the stone railing, his voice barely a whisper. "Liriana?" The name hung in the air like a ghost. And somewhere in the depths of the castle, the ancient stones seemed to sigh in response. The name hung in the air like a ghost. And somewhere in the depths of the castle, the ancient stones seemed to sigh in response. Cale didn't sleep that night. He hadn't needed sleep in over a century, but even so, he would have found no rest. The question circled his mind like carrion birds. Who was Vivian Solon? Why did her daughter carry that face? And why now, after all these years, had fate brought them to his door? By dawn, he'd made his decision. He summoned Celeste to his study as pale light filtered through the violet-tinted windows. "Bring Vivian Solon to me," he commanded. Immediately, Celeste hesitated, her expression tight with concern. "My lord, the woman cannot walk. The illness has worsened overnight. The healers say. Then I will go to her." Celeste's eyes widened. "My lord, show me where she lives." The lower castle levels were a world away from the obsidian grandeur of Cale's chambers. Here, narrow corridors wound through stone passages lit by flickering oil lamps. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood. Servants' quarters lined the halls, small, cramped rooms barely large enough for a bed and a trunk. Celeste stopped before a worn wooden door near the end of the passage. "Here, my lord." Cale didn't knock. He pushed the door open. The room was tiny. A single bed pressed against the far wall. A small table with two mismatched chairs. A shelf holding a few chipped dishes and a wooden doll with golden yarn hair. Areas, no doubt. A faded curtain hung across one corner, hiding what little storage the room provided. And on the bed, barely visible beneath a threadbare blanket, lay Vivian Solon. She was pale, far too pale. Her skin had taken on a grayish cast, and sweat dampened her brow despite the chill in the air. Her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Dark veins spiderwebbed across her neck and collarbone, visible even in the dim light. Kale recognized the signs immediately. Night rot. Vivian's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. When she saw him standing in her doorway, her expression shifted from confusion to outright terror. "No," she whispered hoarsely, trying to sit up. "No, please don't." Arya didn't. She dissolved into a violent coughing fit. Dark flecks spattered across her hand. Not blood, but something worse. Something that reeked of dark magic. Kale crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside the bed. "Be still. Please," Vivian gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't hurt her. She's just a child." She didn't know. She was only trying to help. "I have no intention of harming your daughter," Kale said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But I need answers, Vivian, and you will give them to me." She stared at him, trembling. "My lord, How long have you been ill?" 3 weeks. Maybe 4. I don't remember when it started." Kale's jaw tightened. Nitrate didn't appear naturally. It required deliberate exposure to corrupted vampire essence, a poison only created through dark ritual. Someone had done this to her. "Who knew you were coming to the castle 7 years ago?" he asked. Vivian's breath hitched. No one. I told no one." "Don't lie to me." "I'm not," she broke off, coughing again. When she finally caught her breath, her voice was barely audible. "I had no family left, no friends. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. And before that," her eyes darted away. "I was an apprentice in the city. Just a girl trying to survive." "An apprentice to whom?" Silence. Kale leaned closer, his crimson eyes boring into hers. "You're lying. I can hear your heartbeat quicken. I can smell the fear. Tell me the truth, Vivian, or I will have no choice but to assume the worst." Her lips trembled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "I helped someone once." Kale went very still. "Years ago," Vivian continued, her voice breaking. "I was just a girl, a laundress apprentice in the old servants' wing. I didn't ask questions. I kept my head down. But one night I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." "What did you see?" "A woman," Vivian whispered, "being dragged through the corridors by guards. She was bleeding, crying. They said she was a traitor, that she'd broken sacred law. They were taking her to the execution chamber." Kale's hands clenched into fists. "I should have looked away," Vivian said, tears spilling freely now. "I should have pretended I saw nothing. But she looked at me, and she begged. She said she was carrying a child, that they were going to kill them both." The room seemed to grow colder. "So, I helped her," Vivian breathed. "I showed her the hidden passages, the ones the servants use. I gave her my cloak and my coin purse. I told her where to run, and she escaped." Kale's voice was barely a whisper. "What was her name?" Vivian's eyes met his, filled with pain and ancient grief. "She never told me," she said. "But she had golden hair, blue eyes, and she made me promise that I would never speak of what I'd done. That if anyone ever found out, they'd kill me, kill my family. She said she owed me her life. That one day, somehow, she would repay." She never finished. Her body convulsed, and she doubled over, coughing violently. This time, the dark flecks turned to thick, tar-like substance that splattered across the blanket. "Mommy." Kale spun around. Arya stood in the doorway, her face pale with terror. She rushed to the bed, throwing her small arms around her mother's shaking form. "Mommy, please don't die," she sobbed. "Please." "It's all right, little bird," Vivian whispered, stroking Arya's hair with trembling fingers. "I'm all right." But she wasn't. Kale could see it. The nitrate was spreading faster now, the dark veins crawling up her throat, reaching toward her face. He looked at Vivian, this fragile, dying woman who had risked everything for a stranger. He looked at Arya, clinging to her mother with desperate, unbreakable love. And something old stirred inside him. Something he thought had died the night Liriana was taken from him. Guilt, grief, and beneath it all, a fierce, protective rage. "Celeste," he said sharply. The steward appeared in the doorway. "Summon the court physician. And bring Elder Theron. Tell him it's urgent." "My lord, Elder Theron is in council. I don't care if he's in the crypt. Bring him. Now." Celeste fled. Cale turned back to Vivian, his expression hard and unyielding. "This is not a natural illness. Someone poisoned you. Deliberately. And I intend to find out who." Vivian's eyes widened. Why would you help us?" Cale looked at Arya, still sobbing against her mother's chest. Then he looked at Vivian, at the courage in her eyes, even as death crept closer. "Because 7 years ago," he said quietly, "you saved someone I loved. And I will not let you die for that mercy." "Because 7 years ago," he said quietly, "you saved someone I loved. And I will not let you die for that mercy." The words hung in the air like a vow. Vivian stared at him, understanding dawning in her fevered eyes. But before she could speak, Elder Theron swept into the room, a tall, angular vampire with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. "My lord," Theron said, his gaze flickering to Vivian with barely concealed disdain. "You summoned me for this?" "Nitrot," Cale said flatly. "Examine her. And tell me how she contracted it." Theron's expression shifted to surprise, then calculation. He approached the bed, studying Vivian's symptoms with clinical detachment. After a moment, he straightened. "Nitrot, indeed. Artificially induced. Someone exposed her to corrupted essence, likely through contact or ingestion." He paused. "It's fatal, my lord. Within days, perhaps hours. Can it be cured?" "Not by conventional means. The only treatment would require—" Theron stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Why do you care?" "She's a servant." Cale's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "That is not your concern. Find a way to stabilize her. I'll deal with the cure myself." Theron bowed stiffly and withdrew, but not before casting one final, unsettling glance at Arya. Over the following days, Vivian was moved to the castle's infirmary under Cale's direct protection. The healers worked tirelessly to slow the poison's progress, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Arya refused to leave her mother's side until Cale gently suggested she could help in other ways. "Your mother needs rest," he told her one evening. "But there is work that must be done. Would you help me?" Arya looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Help you? In my office? Small tasks. Things I cannot trust to others." It was a lie, of course. But it got Arya to eat, to sleep, to step away from her mother's sickbed for a few precious hours each day. She began spending her afternoons in Cale's study, perched on a cushioned chair near his desk. At first, she simply watched him work, signing decrees, reading reports, occasionally dictating letters to enchanted quills. But gradually Cale found himself softening. He would pause his work to explain what he was doing. He showed her how to fold linens with perfect corners, the way the royal households required. He ordered warm honeyed bread and spiced tea brought up from the kitchens, watching as she ate with quiet relief. And sometimes, when the silence grew too heavy, he would ask her questions. "What does your mother tell you about the world, Arya?" "She says it's beautiful if you know where to look, and scary if you forget to be brave." "And are you brave?" She considered this seriously. "I'm trying to be." Cale felt something twist in his chest, a phantom pressure, like a heartbeat that no longer existed, trying to remember how to pulse. The castle noticed her presence. One afternoon, as Arya stood by the tall, arched window in Cale's study, storm clouds that had darkened Night Riven for days suddenly parted. Sunlight, rare and golden, spilled through the glass, illuminating her face. Cale looked up sharply. The weather had been locked in a perpetual gloom since the autumn equinox. There was no natural explanation for the sudden clearing. Another time, Arya walked past a wall carved with ancient runes, protective wards from the castle's founding. As she passed, the symbols began to glow faintly, pulsing with soft violet light. She stopped, staring at them in wonder. "They're pretty, like stars." Cale rose from his desk, approaching slowly. The runes had been dormant for over a century. They only responded to bloodlines tied to the castle's original magic. To Liriana's bloodline, he reached out, brushing his fingers across the glowing symbols. They flared brighter at his touch, then brighter still when Arya placed her small hand beside his. "What does it mean?" she asked. Kale's jaw tightened. "It means the castle remembers you." But not everyone welcomed the memory. In the eastern wing, far from Kale's chambers, a group of vampire nobles gathered in a windowless council room. Candles cast flickering shadows across their pale faces as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "The child has been in his office every day for a week," Lady Seraphine hissed, her crimson lips pulled into a sneer. "He's become attached." "More than attached," Lord Varian added darkly. "Obsessed. He's neglecting council meetings, ignoring petitions. All for a human girl. Not just any human," Elder Theron interjected, leaning forward. "I examined the mother. The illness is night rot, yes, but someone wanted it that way. Someone wanted them to be vulnerable. And now the king protects them," Seraphine said. "He's even moved the mother to the royal infirmary. Do you understand what that means?" Silence fell over the room. "He sees her in the child," Varian said quietly. "Liriana." The name sent a ripple of unease through the group. "Liriana's bloodline was supposed to be extinguished," Seraphine said. "The council ordered it. Yet here stands a child with her face, awakening the castle's magic, stirring the king's dead heart." "If he discovers the truth," Theron began. "He cannot discover the truth," Seraphine snapped. "The laws are clear. No unions between immortals and mortals. No half-blood heirs. The child is a threat to everything we've built." Varian nodded slowly. "Then we agreed?" The nobles exchanged glances. "The child must be removed," Seraphine said coldly, "before Kale's attachment becomes irreversible." Arya didn't mean to wander. She'd been looking for the kitchens, hoping to fetch warm milk for her mother, when she took a wrong turn. The corridors of Castle Ravensong were a maze, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. She found herself in a part of the castle she'd never seen before. The walls here were darker, the stone older. Frost clung to the edges of door frames despite the warmth elsewhere. And then she saw the door. It was massive, twice as tall as any other door in the castle, carved from blackened wood and inlaid with silver runes. The same runes that had glowed when she touched the wall in Kale's study. Arya approached slowly. The runes began to glow as she drew near, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The door swung open. Inside was a chamber unlike anything she'd ever seen. Moonlight poured through a circular skylight, illuminating a room filled with ancient tapestries, dusty books, and a single portrait hanging on the far wall. A portrait of a woman with golden hair and blue eyes. Arya stared, transfixed. "You shouldn't be here." She spun around. Kale stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were filled with something that looked like pain. "I'm sorry," Arya whispered. "I got lost. I didn't mean to." "This wing has been sealed for over 100 years, Kale said quietly, stepping inside. "The wards should have kept you out, but they didn't," Arya said, glancing at the glowing runes. They let me in." Kale looked at the portrait, then at Arya. The resemblance was undeniable, impossible, heartbreaking. "The castle recognizes you," he said softly. "It knows your blood." Arya tilted her head. "Whose blood?" Kale knelt before her, his expression grave. "Someone I loved very much. Someone who was taken from me." "The lady in the painting?" "Yes." Arya looked back at the portrait, then at Kale. "She looks like me." "She does." "Is that why you're helping us?" Kale hesitated. Then, with an honesty that surprised even himself, he said, "At first, perhaps. But now." He reached out, gently brushing a curl from her face. "Now I help you because you are brave and kind, and you deserve to be protected." Arya smiled, small, tentative, but real. Outside, in the darkened halls, the conspirators were already moving. The child must be removed. Outside, in the darkened halls, the conspirators were already moving. The child must be removed. But they were too late. The summons came at midnight. Kale was in his study, staring at reports he couldn't focus on, when Celeste burst through the door, breathless, terrified. "My lord, the woman, she's dying." He was moving before she finished speaking. The infirmary was chaotic. Healers rushed between beds, their faces pale with fear. In the corner room, behind a curtain hastily drawn for privacy, Vivian lay convulsing. The dark veins had spread across her entire torso now, crawling up her neck like grasping fingers. Her lips were stained black, and her breathing came in terrible, rattling gasps. Arya knelt beside the bed, clutching her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, please, please don't go." "My lord," one of the healers said urgently, "the nitrate has reached her heart. There's nothing more we can do. She has minutes, perhaps less." Kale dismissed them all with a sharp gesture. "Leave us." They fled. He approached the bed slowly, his gaze fixed on Vivian's agonized face. She turned her head toward him, recognition flickering in her dimming eyes. "My lord," she whispered, "save your strength."
"No."
She coughed, black liquid spattering across the pillow.
"No time."
"Must tell you." Kale knelt beside the bed, bringing himself level with her. "Then tell me. All of it." Vivian's hand trembled as she reached for his. "The woman I helped escape all those years ago, Liriana." A tear slid down Vivian's cheek.
"Yes."
"She told me her name before she ran. Made me swear never to speak it." Kale's jaw clenched. "I searched for her. For months. They told me she was executed. That her body was burned." "A lie," Vivian gasped. "She escaped. Because of me." "But my lord." Her eyes filled with desperate urgency. "She wasn't alone." Kale went very still. "She was with child." Vivian breathed. "Your child." "She was pregnant the night they took her. She begged me to help her. Not for herself, but for the baby. She said you didn't know. That they arrested her before she could tell you." The words hit Kale like a physical blow. "Liriana."
"Pregnant."
"With his child." "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible. I would have felt it. I would have known." "You were away," Vivian said, her voice growing weaker. "At the northern border. The council moved quickly. They wanted her dead before you returned. But I helped her escape. I gave her everything I had. And she survived long enough to give birth." Kale's hands were shaking. 100 years. 100 years he'd believed Liriana dead. Believed their love had ended in ash and blood. But she'd lived. And she'd carried his child. "Where?" he demanded. "Where did she go? Where is my child?" Vivian's breathing hitched.
"She hid."
"Changed her name. Raised the baby in secret. But the child carried your blood, my lord. And Liriana's." The bloodline continued. Through the generations. Hidden. Protected. She turned her head weakly toward Arya, still sobbing beside the bed. "Arya," Vivian whispered, "isn't just a resemblance." Kale's world tilted. He looked at the little girl. Golden curls, blue eyes, a face that had haunted him across a century. He looked at the way the castle responded to her presence. The glowing runes. The parting storms. The ancient magic that recognized her. Because she was Liriana's descendant. His descendant. She is family. Kale breathed, the realization crashing over him like a wave. "She carries our blood." "Yes," Vivian gasped. "And that's why they poisoned me. Not to kill me, my lord. To kill her." Kale's head snapped up. "What?" "The nobles," Vivian said, her voice barely audible now. "They fear her. Fear what she represents. If she lives, if you discover the truth, everything they've built, the laws forbidding unions between vampires and humans, it all falls apart." Understanding crashed over Kale like cold fire. The nitrate wasn't meant for Vivian. It was meant to incapacitate her, to leave Arya vulnerable, unprotected, easy to remove. And he nearly let it happen. "No," he said, his voice hardening to steel.
"No."
"They will not touch her." Vivian's hand tightened weakly around his. "Promise me," she pleaded, her eyes desperate. "Promise me you'll protect her. Even if I can't. Even if they come for her. Promise me she'll be safe." "I swear it," Kale said, his voice raw with emotion he hadn't felt in a century. "On my life, on my throne, on everything I am. No one will harm her." Vivian smiled, small, grateful, heartbroken. "Thank you," she whispered. Then her body convulsed violently. The black veins surged across her face, covering her skin like a web. Her back arched, and a terrible, choking sound escaped her throat. "Mommy!" Arya screamed, throwing herself across her mother's chest. "No, no, no." Cale acted on instinct. He scooped Vivian into his arms, her frail body weighing almost nothing. Arya clung to her mother's hand, refusing to let go. "Where are you taking her?" Arya sobbed. Cale's expression was grim. "To the only place that can save her." The Forbidden Wing was exactly as Arya had seen it hours before. The massive door, the glowing runes, the chamber filled with moonlight. But Cale didn't stop at the portrait room. He carried Vivian deeper, through a hidden passage that opened at his touch, down a spiral staircase carved from obsidian. The air grew colder with each step. Ancient power hummed in the walls. At the bottom lay a circular chamber. In its center stood a stone altar, etched with runes far older than the castle itself. Blood magic, forbidden magic, the kind that demanded a terrible price. Cale laid Vivian gently on the altar. She was barely breathing now, her pulse a faint flutter beneath his fingers. Arya stood beside him, her small hand gripping his coat. "What is this place?" "The heart of Castle Ravensong," Cale said quietly, "where the oldest magic still sleeps." He looked down at Vivian, this brave, selfless woman who had saved the one person he'd loved most in the world, who had protected his bloodline at the cost of her own life. He would not let her die, even if it meant breaking every vow he'd ever made. Cale raised his wrist to his mouth and bit down, drawing blood. It gleamed crimson in the moonlight, ancient and powerful. "Hold on, Vivian," he whispered. "This is going to hurt." And he began the ritual that would either save her or destroy them all. The ancient runes carved into the altar flared to life as Cale's blood touched the stone. Violet light erupted from the symbols, casting writhing shadows across the chamber walls. The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the floor in crystalline patterns. "Stay back," Cale commanded, his voice strained. But Arya didn't move. She stood frozen, watching as he pressed his bleeding wrist to her mother's lips. Blood binding was forbidden for a reason. It didn't heal. It transferred. Life force. Vitality. The very essence of immortality itself. In the wrong hands, it could create abominations. In desperate hands, it could save the dying. But the cost was always severe. Cale began to chant in a language older than kingdoms, older than memory. The words tasted like ash and iron on his tongue. Power surged through him, ancient, wild, barely controlled. It ripped through his veins like liquid fire, pulling at the core of what made him immortal. Vivian's body convulsed. The black veins began to recede, slowly at first, then faster. The night rot that had been devouring her from within met something stronger, vampire blood, laced with magic that predated the illness itself. But the ritual demanded balance. For every moment Vivian's life force strengthened, Cale's weakened. His skin grew paler, almost translucent. His hands trembled. The crimson glow in his eyes flickered like dying embers. "Please work," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Please." The altar blazed brighter. The runes sang with power. And then, with a sound like breaking glass, the magic snapped into place. Vivian gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, and her eyes flew open. Color rushed back into her cheeks. The black veins vanished completely, leaving only faint silver scars in their wake. She was alive, but Cale was falling. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out beneath him. His vision blurred. The chamber spun. He'd given too much, pushed the ritual too far. His immortal body was struggling to remember how to sustain itself after pouring so much life into another. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Arya's terrified face. Then nothing. When Arya realized the king had collapsed, she didn't scream. She didn't run for help. She simply dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands reaching for his face. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "please wake up. Please."
He didn't respond.
His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. His skin was cold, colder than stone, colder than winter. On the altar, Vivian stirred weakly, disoriented but alive. "Arya? What? Where?" "Mommy." Arya's voice cracked. "Mommy, he saved you, but now he won't wake up." Vivian tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She could only watch as her daughter curled against the fallen king, wrapping her small arms around him, as though her warmth alone could bring him back. "Please don't leave me too," Arya whispered into his silver hair.
Please.
"I don't have anyone else." She brushed his hair back from his face with trembling fingers, the way her mother had done for her when she was sick. She took his cold hand in both of hers and held it against her cheek. "You promised," she said softly, tears spilling down her face. "You promised you'd protect us. You can't break promises." Silence filled the chamber. Then, slowly, impossibly, warmth began to return to Kale's hand. Kale woke to the sensation of something small and warm pressed against his chest. His vision cleared gradually. The chamber came into focus. The altar, the dying glow of the runes, the moonlight streaming through the narrow window above. And Arya. She'd fallen asleep against him, her golden curls splayed across his coat, her hand still clutching his. Even in sleep, she held on as though afraid he'd disappear. Kale's chest tightened, not with pain, but with something he hadn't felt in over a century. This is what it means to be needed, he realized. To matter. Not as a king, not as a ruler, but as someone's protector, someone's hope. He shifted slightly, and Arya stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, those impossibly blue eyes that carried Liriana's light. "You're awake," she breathed. "I am." She threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward. "I thought you were gone. I thought." "I'm here," Kale said quietly, awkwardly returning the embrace. "I'm not going anywhere." She pulled back, studying his face with a seriousness far beyond her years. "You saved Mommy." "Yes."
Why?
Kale looked past her to where Vivian lay on the altar, now breathing steadily, sleeping peacefully. Then he looked back at Arya, at this brave, impossible child who had walked into his fortress and awakened something he thought long dead. "Because you asked me to," he said simply. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Arya's expression softened. She reached up and gently touched his face, her small hand resting against his cheek. "Thank you." Kale closed his eyes, allowing himself, just for a moment, to feel the warmth of her touch. The innocence.
The trust.
She is Liriana's blood, he thought. My blood. The last remnant of everything I lost. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. He'd spent a century as a king, cold, distant, untouchable. He'd built walls around his heart so high that nothing could reach him. But Arya had slipped through those walls without effort, had reminded him what it meant to care, to protect, to love. He would not fail her. "Come," he said, gathering her into his arms as he stood. His strength was returning, slowly but surely. "Your mother needs rest. And so do you. What about you?" "I'll be fine. Promise." He looked down at her, this tiny girl who'd already lost so much, and yet still found the courage to hope. "I promise." As Kale carried Arya and watched over Vivian through the remainder of the night, a single thought burned through his mind with cold, unyielding clarity. Someone did this. Someone poisoned Vivian. Someone tried to kill the last trace of Liriana's bloodline. And when he discovered who, they would learn what it meant to face a vampire king's wrath. Not the political maneuvering of the court, not the calculated punishments of law, but the raw, merciless fury of a man who had finally found something worth protecting and refused to let it be taken from him again. But the raw, merciless fury of a man who had finally found something worth protecting and refused to let it be taken from him again. The summons came 3 days later. Kale stood in the throne room, arms crossed, as the vampire nobles filed in one by one. Their expressions ranged from cold disapproval to barely concealed hostility. At their head walked Lady Seraphine, Lord Varian, and Elder Theron, the same three who'd gathered in secret council. The same three, Kale suspected, who'd orchestrated Vivian's poisoning. "My lord," Seraphine began, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "We come before you with grave concerns." "Speak plainly," Kale said. "I have no patience for games." Varian stepped forward. "You have violated sacred law, Lord Ravensong. The blood-binding ritual is forbidden. You know this." "I used it to save a life. A human life," Theron interjected sharply. "You expended your immortal essence, the very power that sustains this kingdom, on a mortal servant. This is unconscionable. Kale's eyes narrowed dangerously. She is not just a servant. No, Seraphine said coldly. She is the mother of a child who carries a forbidden bloodline. A child who should never have existed. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. You knew, Kale said quietly. All of you. You knew Liriana survived. You knew about the child. Silence. Then Varian spoke, his voice hard. The law is absolute. No unions between vampires and mortals. No half-blood heirs. When Liriana escaped a century ago, we believed the problem solved itself. She died in obscurity, or so we thought. But her bloodline persisted, Seraphine continued. And now that child's descendant has entered this castle, awakened its magic, and captured your heart. This cannot stand. Kale descended the steps from his throne slowly, deliberately. What exactly are you demanding? The woman and child must be removed, Theron said flatly. Banished from Nitrivan. Sent far beyond our borders where they can pose no threat. And if they refuse to go? The nobles exchanged glances. Then we will remove them by force, Seraphine said. It is our duty to protect the sanctity of vampire law. Even from you, my lord. Kale's laugh was cold and utterly devoid of humor. You threaten me. In my own hall. We remind you, Varian said. The council has authority to. The council, Kale interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, serves at my discretion. And I am telling you now, you will not touch them. My lord, they are under my protection. Vivian Solon and her daughter will remain in this castle as long as they wish. Anyone who harms them answers to me personally. Seraphine's eyes flashed with anger. You would defy centuries of tradition for a human child? I would burn your traditions to ash, Kale said coldly, before I let you harm Liriana's bloodline. The chamber erupted in outraged whispers. Then you leave us no choice, Varian said grimly. The council will convene to discuss your removal from power. Try it, Kale said softly, and discover what a vampire king can do when he stops pretending to care about your laws. They didn't wait for a formal vote. That evening, as Kale reviewed reports in his study, the attack came. Arya had been walking back from the kitchens, carrying a tray of food for her mother, when 3 figures stepped from the shadows. Nobles she didn't recognize. Their eyes glowed crimson in the dim corridor. Little girl, one of them said, his voice silken with menace. You should not be here. Arya backed away, clutching the tray. I'm just bringing food to. Your mistake, the vampire hissed. An abomination. And we're going to correct that mistake. He reached for her. And the castle screamed. The walls shuddered. The floor cracked. Ancient runes blazed to life across every surface, flooding the corridor with blinding violet light. The enchanted wards, dormant for a century, surged with protective fury. The nobles recoiled, shielding their eyes. What is this? Then Kale was there. He materialized from the shadows like death itself, moving faster than mortal eyes could follow. His hand closed around the noble's throat, lifting him off the ground with effortless strength. You dare, Kale whispered, his voice glacial with rage. My lord, we were only... Kale slammed him against the wall. The stone cracked. You were only what? Threatening a child under my protection? Attempting murder in my own halls. The other 2 nobles tried to flee. The castle doors slammed shut. The runes flared brighter, trapping them inside. No, Kale said softly. You wanted to confront me. So confront me. He released the first noble, letting him crumple to the floor. Then he turned to face all 3, his crimson eyes blazing with an ancient, terrible power. Who ordered the poisoning? Who gave Vivian the nitrate? Silence. Kale's patience shattered. He moved in a blur, seizing the nearest noble by the collar. Speak. Theron, the vampire gasped. Elder Theron arranged it. He has contacts in the dark market, suppliers of corrupted essence he paid them to. Kale threw him aside and turned to Arya. She stood frozen, the tray fallen and forgotten at her feet. He knelt before her, his expression softening. Are you hurt? She shook her head, eyes wide. The walls, they were glowing. The castle protects its own, Kale said quietly. And you, Arya, are one of its own. Behind them, the 3 nobles scrambled to their feet, terror etched on their faces. Take them to the dungeons, Kale commanded, and guards materialized from the shadows. And summon the full council. Immediately. An hour later, the throne room was packed. Every noble, every elder, every member of the vampire court stood in uneasy silence as Kale addressed them from his throne. Arya stood beside him. She'd refused to leave his side. Elder Theron, Kale said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Step forward. Theron approached, his expression carefully neutral. My lord, did you orchestrate the poisoning of Vivian Solon? A heartbeat of silence. Then Theron's mask cracked. I did what was necessary to protect our laws. Gasps rippled through the crowd. You confess, Kale said softly. I do. The woman harbored forbidden bloodline. The child is an abomination. Our laws demand. Your laws, Kale interrupted, rising from his throne, are broken. They were written by cowards who feared what they could not control, who murdered an innocent woman because she carried my child. He descended the steps, and the nobles parted before him like water. Liriana was executed in secret because you feared her bloodline would challenge your power. You poisoned Vivian for the same reason. And now you demand I surrender Arya, my descendant, the last trace of the woman I loved, to your so-called justice. He stopped before Theron, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I refuse. Then you are no longer fit to rule, Seraphine declared, stepping forward. The council invokes the ancient right. We challenge your authority. So be it, Kale said calmly. But know this. If you move against me, you move against the castle itself. As if in response, the throne room trembled. The ancient runes carved into the walls blazed to life. The very stones seemed to hum with recognition. Arya stepped forward, her small hand slipping into Kale's, and the castle's magic surged, protective, fierce, undeniable. The nobles felt it, the raw power, the ancient bond between bloodline and stone. They backed away. This child, Kale said, his voice ringing with authority, is under my protection. Anyone who harms her will face not just my wrath, but the wrath of Castle Ravensong itself. The coup died before it could begin. The coup died before it could begin. But the council was not finished. 3 nights later, the formal summons arrived, sealed with the ancient crest of the Vampire Council, written in blood ink that shimmered in the candlelight. Lord Kale Ravensong is hereby summoned to stand judgment before the full Council of Elders for crimes against immortal law. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to appear will result in immediate forfeiture of the throne. Kale read it once, then let it fall to his desk. Celeste stood in the doorway, her face pale. My lord, they've never invoked a bloodline judgment before. Not in 500 years. Then it's long overdue, Kale said quietly. They mean to depose you. Let them try. The council chamber was circular, carved from obsidian, and lit by floating orbs of cold blue fire. 13 thrones ringed the space, one for each elder, with a single stone platform in the center where the accused would stand. Kale entered alone. The elders sat in silence, their expressions ranging from hostile to carefully blank. Seraphine wore a satisfied smile. Varian's eyes glittered with anticipation. Theron, now stripped of his title but present as a witness, watched with cold resentment. At the highest throne sat Magistrate Corvus, ancient even by vampire standards, his silver beard braided with bone charms. Lord Ravensong, Corvus intoned, you stand before this council accused of violating sacred law. How do you answer? I answer that your laws are unjust, Kale said calmly. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. You do not deny the charges? I used the blood-binding ritual. I protected mortals within castle walls. I have declared them under my personal protection despite council objections. Kale's voice was steady, unflinching. I deny nothing. Seraphine rose from her throne. Then you admit to breaking the most fundamental law of our kind, the prohibition against unions between vampires and mortals. I admit to nothing of the sort. The child carries mixed blood, she spat. Her very existence is a violation. Her existence, Kale said coldly, is the result of a love your council tried to murder. Corvus raised a hand for silence. The evidence, Lady Seraphine. Seraphine produced a scroll, unrolling it with theatrical precision. Vivian Solon aided the escape of a condemned criminal 100 years ago. She has admitted this herself. The criminal was Liriana Ashvin, a mortal woman who seduced our king and conceived a forbidden child. She didn't seduce anyone, Kale said, his voice dangerously quiet. I loved her. Love does not supersede law, Varian interjected. Liriana was executed for her crimes. She was murdered, Kale corrected, in secret, while I was away, because you feared what our union represented. We feared chaos, Corvus said heavily. The mixing of bloodlines threatens the very foundation of our society. If vampires and mortals interbreed freely, what becomes of us? Of our power? Of our immortality? You become human, Theron said from his seat.
Weak.
Deluded. Mortal. You become whole, Kale countered. Capable of growth. Of change. Of something beyond this stagnant existence you've built. Heresy, Seraphine hissed. Truth, Kale shot back. Corvus leaned forward. The child, Arya Solon. The council demands she and her mother be exiled beyond our borders. Permanently. This is our judgment. Kale's hands clenched into fists.
No.
You have no authority to refuse. I have every authority, Kale said, his voice rising. I am king of this realm, and I will not surrender them to your fear and prejudice. Then you force our hand, Seraphine said coldly. We invoke the right of deposition. The council votes to remove you from. Arya is Liriana's descendant, Kale said. The chamber fell silent. What? Corvus whispered. Kale stepped forward, his crimson eyes blazing. The child you want is dead. The bloodline you want erased. She carries not just Liriana's blood, but mine. Liriana was pregnant when you executed her. She escaped.
She survived.
She gave birth to my child, our child, and that bloodline has endured through the generations. The elders stared in shocked silence. Arya Solon, Kale continued, his voice ringing through the chamber, is my descendant, my family, the last living connection to the woman I loved. And you want me to send her to her death because your laws are too rigid to accommodate the truth. Impossible, Theron breathed. The bloodline was cleansed. You failed, Kale said flatly. Liriana lived. Her child lived. And now that bloodline stands in my castle, under my protection, awakening magic your council thought extinct. Seraphine's face had gone pale. The prophecy. What prophecy? Kale demanded. Corvus closed his eyes. An old legend, a warning that if the king's mortal bloodline ever returned, it would herald the end of the old laws, the dissolution of the council's power, a new age. You feared it so much, Kale said quietly, that you were willing to murder, to poison, to destroy an innocent child. She is not innocent, Seraphine cried. She is the harbinger of. She is a child, Kale roared, and the chamber shook with the force of his rage. A brave, kind, innocent child who walked into my fortress to save her mother. And you want her dead because she threatens your control. He turned to face the full council, his expression terrible in its cold fury. If protecting them breaks your laws, he said, his voice like ice, then your laws deserve to burn. I will not surrender Arya. I will not surrender Vivian. And if you attempt to remove them, I will abdicate this throne, take them into exile, and let you rule over ashes. Gasps echoed through the chamber. You would abandon your kingdom? Corvus asked, disbelief in his voice. I would abandon a kingdom built on murder and fear, Kale said. Without hesitation, the elders looked at one another, uncertainty flickering across their ancient faces. Kale pressed forward. Or you can accept the truth. Acknowledge that your laws are broken. Allow me to protect my family and forge a new path forward. This is madness, Theron muttered. This is justice, Kale countered. A long, heavy silence fell. Then Corvus spoke, his voice weary. A vote. All in favor of deposing Lord Ravensong and exiling the mortals. For hands rose. Seraphine, Varian, Theron, one other. All opposed. 9 hands rose. The relief that washed over Kale was staggering. Corvus stood slowly. The council has spoken. Lord Ravensong retains his throne. The mortals remain under royal protection. He fixed Kale with a penetrating stare. But know this, the old laws still stand. If this bloodline brings chaos to our realm, the responsibility falls on you. I accept that responsibility, Kale said. Seraphine rose abruptly. This is a mistake. You will all see. You are dismissed, Lady Seraphine, Corvus said coldly, along with Lord Varian and the conspirators. Your titles are stripped, your lands forfeit. You will leave Nitrivan by dawn. Seraphine's face twisted with rage, but she said nothing. She swept from the chamber, Varian and the others following. Kale watched them go, knowing this victory was fragile, temporary, but it was enough. For now, Arya was safe, and that was all that mattered. Vivian woke 3 days later. The infirmary was quiet in the early morning hours, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and painting the room in shades of amber and rose. She opened her eyes slowly, confused by the softness of the bed beneath her, the warmth of clean blankets, the absence of pain. The last thing she remembered was darkness.
Cold.
The terrible certainty that she was dying.
But now.
Mommy. Arya's voice shattered the peaceful silence. The little girl came running from the doorway, her face streaked with tears of joy, and threw herself onto the bed. Careful, Vivian whispered, but she was already wrapping her arms around her daughter, holding her close. Oh, my little bird. I'm here. I thought you were gone. Arya sobbed into her mother's shoulder. You were so sick, and the medicine wasn't working, and sho. Vivian stroked her daughter's golden curls, tears sliding down her own cheeks. I'm all right now, I promise. She looked up and found Kale standing in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes betraying relief. You saved me, Vivian said softly. I did what was necessary, Kale replied. At great cost to yourself, from what the healers tell me. She held his gaze. Why? Kale was silent for a moment. Then he stepped into the room, approaching the bed slowly. Because you protected something precious to me. And because. He glanced at Arya, still clinging to her mother. Because she asked me to. Vivian smiled through her tears. Thank you, my lord. Kale, he corrected quietly. Just
Kale.
That evening, after Vivian had rested and eaten her first real meal in weeks, Arya found Kale in his study. He was standing by the window, staring out over Nitrivan as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. Your Majesty? Arya said softly from the doorway.
He turned.
Come in, Arya. She approached slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. Mommy's awake. I know. I'm glad. She says we can leave now, that we don't have to stay if we're causing trouble. Kale's expression softened. He knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. Do you want to leave? Arya looked down at her feet.
No.
But I don't want you to be in trouble because of us.
Arya.
He waited until she met his eyes. You are not in trouble. You are. He paused, searching for the right words. You are the best thing that has happened to this castle in over a century. Her eyes widened. Really? Really? So, are we staying? Kale felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. If you'll have me. Arya's face lit up. Have you? As your protector, your guardian, your family. The words felt strange on his tongue, but right. If that's what you want. She didn't answer with words. She simply threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. Kale closed his eyes and returned the embrace, feeling the weight of a century of loneliness begin to lift. The next day, Kale had Vivian and Arya's belongings moved from the servants' quarters to the royal wing. He gave them a suite of rooms adjacent to his own, spacious chambers with tall windows, comfortable furniture, and a view of the entire city. Vivian protested at first. My lord, this is too much. We don't need. You are under my protection, Kale said firmly. And those under my protection do not live in cramped quarters near the kitchens. This is not a request, Vivian. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you. For everything. You saved Liriana, he said quietly. This is the least I can do. That evening, Kale found Arya in his study. She'd pulled a chair up to his desk and was carefully folding a stack of linens, the ones from the laundry she'd insisted on finishing. She hummed as she worked, a soft, tuneless melody that filled the usually silent room with unexpected warmth. Kale stood in the doorway, watching her. The candles had brightened in her presence, casting a gentle glow across the obsidian walls. The enchanted quills had stilled, as if even they were content to simply listen. And for the first time in 100 years, Kale smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile he wore in council chambers. Not the polite mask he showed to nobles and diplomats. A real smile.
Warm. Genuine. Alive.
Arya looked up and caught him watching. Am I doing it wrong? No, Kale said, stepping into the room. You're doing it perfectly. She beamed and returned to her work, her small hands smoothing the fabric with careful precision. Kale sat at his desk and picked up his abandoned reports, but he found himself glancing at her every few moments, listening to her humming, watching the way the candlelight caught in her golden curls. This, he realized, was what he'd been missing. Not power, not immortality, not even revenge. Connection.
Purpose. Family.
Dawn arrived with unusual brilliance. The perpetual twilight that had shrouded Castle Ravensong for months finally broke, and golden sunlight spilled across the towers and battlements. The castle itself seemed to glow from within, as though awakening from a long, dark sleep. Kale stood on his private balcony, Arya beside him, and Vivian on her other side. Below them, Nightriven stretched out in a tapestry of cobblestone streets and flickering lanterns, slowly stirring to life as morning came. It's beautiful, Arya whispered. It is, Kale agreed. Vivian glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. What happens now, my lord?
Now.
Kale considered the question. Now we rebuild. The council is weakened. The old laws are being questioned. Change is coming, whether they want it or not. And us. You stay, Kale said simply. For as long as you wish. This is your home now. Both of you. Arya slipped her small hand into his, and he squeezed it gently. They stood together in the dawn light, a vampire king who had learned to care again, a mortal woman who had risked everything for compassion, and a brave little girl who had walked into a castle of monsters and found a family. Not bound by blood alone, but by chosen love, by sacrifice, by the impossible destiny that had brought them together across a century of grief and loss. Castle Ravensong had found its heart again, and this time Kale would protect it, no matter the cost. In the months that followed, whispers spread through Nightriven. Stories of the vampire king who defied ancient law for a human child, of the castle that glowed when she laughed, of a love that had survived death itself, reborn in the innocent courage of a 6-year-old girl. The old order was crumbling. A new age was beginning. And at its center stood 3 unlikely souls, proof that family was not defined by bloodline or law, but by the fierce, unbreakable bonds forged in darkness and sealed in light. The story of the vampire king and the laundress's daughter had only just begun.